Hello again, everyone. Brian with BMK Retro Gaming. Tonight I've got a little bit of a video I hadn't quite planned until recently. You see, one of my favorite YouTubers, MrPoestyle, posted a video about remembering his very first home video game console, along with many of my other favorite YouTubers, Brian Puddin with Brian's Man Cave, Willie with ArcadeUSA, and Chris the Atari Creep. And a lot of them have been encouraging other gaming and retro gaming YouTubers to do the same. So, we're going to go over my first home video game console. Which was, for me, I'm a rather young retro gamer in a sense, being about 38 years old now. And, my first home video game console came when I was 3. My parents got me the third generation Nintendo NES, which is kind of an interesting story for me because, well, my family was fairly wealthy when my parents were still married, and they went out, to their local Walmart. I asked them about it later and saying, we want to buy our son his first home video game console. He's 3. What's the best one? And, I found out later on that the Nintendo NES was still basically doing the test marketing at that time and wasn't available everywhere, but that's what was recommended. So my parents got me that, and quite a few of the early launch games that it came with. Anyway, I don't have my original anymore. In fact, these days I game on it through a couple of methods, which I'm going to show you guys briefly. Here's one, which is the Hyperkin Retron 5. Hope you guys can see that okay there. Yep. It uses mostly emulation to recreate the capabilities, though it also uses cartridges as kind of a pass-through, a key which unlocks the game file within it. And it can also play, let me see, besides just the NES, the SNES, Sega Genesis, let me see, it says it all here too. The Super Famicom, which is the Japanese version of the SNES, the Famicom, the Japanese NES, the Sega Genesis, Mega Drive, Game Boy, Game Boy Color, and Game Boy Advance, and with an adapter, a 3-in-1 adapter sold separately, it can also play the Sega Master System and Sega Game Gear games. Or the Sega Master System games can be enabled if you happen to have an old working power base converter, I think it was called, or yeah. Anyway, it's pretty good at that. And then we have the Fc3 Plus, which is a pure hardware clone. It also will play beyond Nintendo NES games, the Nintendo SNES games, and Sega Genesis games. And it uses AV cables. The Retron 5 uses HDMI, which is good, like with my Retron 77, for plugging up your to your modern day flat screen TV. I have a 40-inch. And it uses a proprietary controller, which is not bad. It's kind of between a it's more or less like a Sega Genesis controller. Whereas the Retron 5 also can support original controllers beyond just its own proprietary controller. Now, some of the games I played back then, the first Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles game was a favorite of mine, though I hardly ever got past the dam level. I know that's been a tough one for many others, too. But, you know, like a lot of kids who grew up in between the mid 80s and 90s, the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles were pretty hot, and I was hooked on them. And let's see, there was also the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 2, the arcade game. This one was good. I actually got one of those little cheat devices, a Game Genie, after a while, and used a pretty simple cheat to give me unlimited continue so I could finally manage to beat the game at one point. But this one, I played a ton of this, and I played it in the arcades too. Then there was Captain Skyhawk, another one of my favorites, though I, at that age, didn't really understand what to do with it all that well. Then we have Top Gun. Again, I didn't understand it very well and never got that far in it, but it was a favorite. I always wanted to be a fighter pilot after seeing that movie. And some may not even know about this one, but this is Top Gun 2, the next mission, which was actually a friend of mine had this at first, and I couldn't get much anywhere with it, didn't understand what to do very well, but these days my local game exchange retailer, which is pretty good for getting your retro gaming and your modern excellent gaming too, at about or close enough to fair market price, I picked up this copy and have been trying to figure out for a minute. Anyway, back at that age, I was 3 years old when they got me the Nintendo NES, and, well, as you can imagine, a lot of games, you know, were more or less just pick up and play. Of course, I'd been nearly a victim of, at 6 weeks of sudden infant death syndrome, which is where the baby's brain, for some reason or other, does not tell it to breathe anymore. But long story short, my mother had to go back to work the next day, or she was going to before that happened, was holding me and realized something was wrong, and with some help from my grandmother and my adoptive father, managed to revive me. And because of that, she was told that there might have been some possible brain damage, though don't know if there was or not. So she literally was reading to me from the cradle, everything from comic books to novels and magazines and all, of course leaving out curse words, swear words, things she didn't want me to learn yet. So I became an avid reader at an early age, and even at 3, I could read the manuals some, though I didn't bother a lot. I might have somebody read them to me if I need to, but you know, I didn't always understand the games or how to play them, even with that. My parents made some mistakes like getting me games like The Legend of Zelda and Zelda 2, Link's Adventure. And even if I could read through the entire manual and kept with it, at 3 years old, I mean, I've known some adults who try to play those games and have a hard time figuring them out without having a game guide or something. So that was kind of a lost cause back then. Need to get some copies of those and figure out how to get through them when I get a chance. Anyway, so like I said, my family, with my parents still married, was fairly wealthy, and my adoptive father still is, though we're not close anymore. And so I had tons of games for the Nintendo NES. And then later on, I would start to understand gaming better as I grew a bit older, and I ended up getting a Nintendo SNES, and by then I was understanding games well enough that I started to get somewhere with them. And I didn't get into the Sega Genesis as an adult, though. I had a Sega Game Gear. I had every Game Boy pretty much from the original up through the Game Boy Color. Only with the Retron 5 did I start getting into the Game Boy Advance. And my parents would let me play and have pretty much what I wanted. And they knew that I understood that the violence and stuff, you know, it was all pretend. It was a game. I wasn't going to go out and do that stuff for real. So they didn't really censor much what I could have and play. But still, for some reason, my mother and father never would letting me have a Sega Genesis. Probably because it was the you know, cool, how do you say, outsider console, you know. It was the one that was a standout and kind of outrageous. You know, the Sega Scream and everything. So I didn't get into that until I was an adult, and I also had, let's see, an original PlayStation. I had the Nintendo N64, um, even had an Xbox and briefly an Xbox One as an adult. So my gaming experience went quite a ways. I'm not really big into the modern X and stuff, They've gotten into stuff like, paid DLC and microtransactions that just aren't cool with me and stuff. And, back in the day, when I was coming up, you'd buy a game, whether it came on a cartridge or later on an optical disc, and you had your whole game. Everything you were supposed to have bought was right there with what you had bought. With that in your console, you had everything you needed to play it. If the game had bugs or something and they were going to release a fixed version later on, if you could afford to buy it, you did. If not, you just kept what you had and dealt with it. And then in the mid-90s, I ended up with my second stepfather having two older stepbrothers, Alan and James, and they had, I don't know what model, but it was an Atari VCS 2600, an Atari 5200, and an Atari 7800, and that's when I started getting hooked into the older stuff. And later on, I would discover through my local Hastings entertainment store the ColecoVision and Television Flashback. I also have a Atari Flashback 5 still. They all still work, believe it or not. I began discovering about them, read about the Atari ZEGs, the XE game system. And so that became where the heart of my retro gaming lies and why my channel focuses more on them. Excuse me. Admittedly, I still need to get an Atari 5200, an Atari 7800, and an Atari ZEGs, and my CollectorVision Phoenix, which is basically a modern recreation of all the capabilities of the ColecoVision and then some, is not terribly far out from arriving, so we're going to get there. Anyway, that's basically, how that was my first home video game console, and some of my experience with gaming since, and how I came to be the dedicated retro gamer with what I'm into now. And yeah, I'm like, like I've said in other videos, I love what Nintendo does, like others do, and what they have done. Not crazy about their stances on things like emulation and homebrew games, but, most of the big game companies tend to be that way about it. If they had their way, it would all be illegal, but really, like with emulation, for instance. Perfectly legal. I mean, an emulator like the ones I've got, or hardware clone, as long as no original code or hardware was looked at and it was reverse engineered, it is perfectly legal. And if the big gaming companies would give you the ability to emulate everything from their old libraries that you want to, themselves, others wouldn't have any reason to be doing it. And homebrews, they're basically a form of fan art, so, for the most part. Anyway, let's see, the ones I mentioned, my favorite YouTubers, Brian Puddin with Brian's Man Cave, MrPoestyle, Lily with ArcadeUSA, and Chris the Atari Creep. I'm going to include links to their videos on this subject too, so you guys can check them out if you like. Please like, subscribe to, and share this video if you enjoy my content and others. And please feel free to leave any questions, comments, or suggestions in the comment section below. You guys have a good night, and I will see you again in my next video.